Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a lady a little bit like me, was cancelled same year as me. There's so many people who were cancelled in 2020, but she was cancelled a few months before me. And because of that, I missed her story completely because at that point I was in my own bubble. I didn't think people got cancelled. I didn't think we had a problem in society. It only came to the fore with me in June when I was cancelled, and now I recognise these stories and read these stories. But this lady was cancelled several months before me, so therefore I missed it. And luckily for me, she contacted me and says, could we chat about what happened to her and just a general state of society at the moment? So first of all, let me welcome Stella Perret to the show. Welcome, Stella.
Oh, hello, Nick. I don't know how much of me you can see, so I'm going to stand up and show my t-shirt, which I hope everybody can see.
Thought criminal.
Thought criminal, yeah.
Well, do you know what? I think we're all thought criminals these days.
Yeah, we all are, aren't we? I had to Google you just to check why you were cancelled. But I think what we've got in common is that we've both been helped by the Free Speech Union, and we're both free speech advocates in other areas than just what we got cancelled for. So I think we've got that in common.
And for people who don't know about the Free Speech Union, they will help you if you get in trouble because of free speech. They're a membership organisation, so join them today. Even if you don't need them, your money will help people like me and Stella fight back and save our own lives. Because the Free Speech Union saved my life. At that point, when I got in contact with them, I was done. I was cancelled. My name was mud.
Well, I was very much the same for me, Nick. I didn't have any network of friends or professional people. Like a lot of these people that are cancelled, they've already got a big network of people who can support them, right? They're academics or they're journalists, and they've already got a big network of people who are up with all this stuff, contacts in the media and so on. But I had nothing like that, nothing at all. And not only that, it was just at the beginning of the lockdown. So we were all just being sent home to work from home. So I had nothing.
And I would imagine, like me, all your friends and colleagues saw what happened to you and all went, oh, I'm saying nothing because that could happen to me. That's what happened in my case.
It was a little bit different for me because I was a union rep at work, and I was cancelled by the left. I was actually cancelled by the left. And most of my union colleagues at work, we were all so far to the left that we'd never even voted Labour. Do you know what I mean? We were all so far to the left. And so most of my union colleagues at work knew about what had happened through their own little circles, but it wasn't widely known. I wouldn't have said it was widely known, but it was just on the brink of blowing up to becoming national news. And yeah, like you, my name was I was being called a transphobic cartoonist. The TUC held a special meeting and threatened the newspaper with defunding and closing it down.
Let's get into this now then. So this is a great segue. So tell us your story. You were working for the Morning Star, which I believe is a communist daily newspaper in the UK. So when you say you were on the left, you really mean you was on the left.
I would. I mean, I didn't start voting till I was about 30 because I was so apolitical. I couldn't see that anybody represented me at all. And then when I did start voting, I was very, very left wing. I mean, I would have voted for communist candidates if they stood, no problem at all. And I became a political cartoonist for the Morning Star in 2015, right when Jeremy Corbyn got elected. So everybody was thinking, oh, socialism is coming back into British politics in a big way, and they just liked my stuff. I mean, they had a very, they were very out there in what they would accept, in terms of making jokes. I mean, we were ripping into the Labour Party all the time, but also ripping into the establishment, the monarchy, the police, the EU, you name it, they went after it, the Morning Stars. So I felt very much at home there. To me, that was ideal territory for me. And I was with them for 5 years with no problems at all.
But the problem came because they deemed one of your cartoons as not ripping into the establishment, not ripping into the government or the Labour Party, but ripping into something or a group that the far left thinks they need to support and they need to protect. So they went after you because they felt you attacked the wrong group.
Well, straight away, I want to say that I have never blamed the Morning Star for this at all. They didn't have a leg to stand on. The Trade Union Council held a special meeting. First time this has ever been done, threatened them with closure if they didn't apologise for publishing my cartoon and drop me like a hot brick. So they were forced into that position. And as I've said to you before, I had to go to the Free Speech Union because I didn't have any other resource to help me. And the Free Speech Union, first of all, threatened the Morning Star with defamation because I was being slandered all over the place as being transphobic, this and hateful that. And even though nobody knew who I was from Adam, my name was now all over the world on Twitter. And I'd never been on Twitter, still I've never been on Twitter. And the worst thing about it, Nick, as I'm sure you found yourself, is that they don't just go after you, they go after your friends, your colleagues, people who are professionally associated with you, and start attacking them if they're on Twitter. So that was starting to happen to me within a couple of weeks of this cancellation. So the Free Speech Union threatened the Morning Star with defamation. We didn't think that would fly because a single person has to do the defamation, right? So the newspaper as a whole couldn't be. But what I wanted a right of reply to be printed in the newspaper, and I wanted a personal apology from the editor. And I managed to get the personal apology. Still, nearly 3 years later, I haven't had my right to reply printed in the paper. They still haven't officially apologized or contacted me or anything. I am literally persona non grata. And it's a shame because I had a really nice relationship with them. And I don't blame the individual managers there at all.
You did better than me because at least you got an apology. The three personal friends who sacked me from the charity I founded have never apologized, have never contacted me, never spoke to me again after they sent me one sentence email sacking me. And then obviously I beat them, and they all resigned. And they've never contacted me since and never apologized, never explained themselves. And I don't blame them per se. I blame the online mob for bullying them into being cowards, because that's what they were in the end of the day, in my view, is they were cowards, and they went, oh, this is all getting upsetting and nasty. If we give him Nick's head, it'll all go away. So they gave him my head.
In a way, I've probably been luckier than you that it didn't come into my close circle of family and friends. It was more people who were associated with me because I'm a book illustrator as well. So it was people who were like authors who had used my work. The Twitter mobs went after them. It's a horrible experience, Nick, and it all happened at the worst possible time, beginning of the lockdowns. You know, I'm a carer for my husband. He was going through a terrible time as well. It was a terrible time for it to happen, and you just feel completely isolated, don't you? You don't know which way to turn, you know?
It's like shell shock. You have no idea what's going on. You have no experience in this. You're scared of doing something in case it makes it worse. You're scared of doing something in case it makes it better. You're scared of getting other people involved. It's absolutely, I think if it ever happened again to me, I'd handle it so much better because I've got some experience to rely on. But the first time, I just felt like a rabbit in the headlights. I didn't know what to do for right or wrong or make it better, or I didn't know anything. I was in shock.
Yeah, I mean, you and me are normal, ordinary people. You know, we weren't at any high levels. We didn't have strings of letters after our name. You know, as I've said before, I'm not saying this because I have a chip on my shoulder, but an awful lot of people who've faced cancellation have had much more resource, you know, in terms of support than you or me would have had, you know?
Yeah. I mean, at that point, my life was over. I was unemployable in the field I'd spent 2 decades working in. Who was going to employ Nick the Nazi? my life was, that's why I fought back, because I didn't think I'd win the way I won. I didn't think that I'd be completely victorious. Um, I fought back trying to save part of my reputation so I could get another job. Because at that point I was thinking I'd be stacking shelves in Tesco's because no one else is going to want to employ me. And there's nothing wrong in stacking shelves at Tesco's, but that's not my field. My field is the charity sector, the social sector, and being known as Nick the Nazi wasn't going to do me any good.
Well, being cancelled bounced me into early retirement. You know, I was making plans towards early retirement anyway, and then the lockdowns came and we were all sent to work from home. And I just thought, what it was, because it all happened that because I was cancelled by the left, it meant that my own union tried to chuck me out of the union as well, and tried to get rid of me as a union rep, which was my unpaid union rep. I specialised in disability and apprenticeships, by the way. And yeah, so my own union came after me, and my local union branch secretary was a lovely old guy, nearly retirement himself. He said, I will defend you, Stella. And I said, what, you mean you'll defend me against our own union? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm not having it. I said, because all my colleagues at work will be dragged into it. They're not just going to go after you, they'll go after your family, your friends, anybody you know who's on Twitter, they will go after. I said, I'm not having it. I said, I'm going to go for early retirement instead. So that might be seen as the coward's way out, but it was, you know, I had to do it because I didn't want all my union colleagues dragged into it, Nick. I just couldn't.
And I don't think that isn't a coward's way out. Everyone is at a different position in their life and has different skills and has different problems going on. It's up to that individual to decide what's best for them when something like this happens. So,
and it was the total lack of support from the unions, the total lack of support, the lack of sisterhood. Where's the support for women, you know, within the unions? And only about a year before, I'd actually won a national union award for my work as a union rep, you know. It was ridiculous.
And none of that matters. Once you're in there, gun sights, none of that matters. So let's talk about this horrendous Nazi, racist, homophobic cartoon that you made in 2020. Tell me how bad this cartoon was.
Well, I hope you're going to put this on the screen so people can see it. Okay. So some people within the women's movement have been calling this the crocodile cartoon because it's obviously got a crocodile in it. It has a name. It's called Endgame. And when I sent it to the Morning Star, I sent a little piece with it explaining my motivation. Because as a political cartoonist, you look at what's in the news that week, and you're right, I'm going to do a cartoon about that. Then you forget all about it and you move on to what's hot in the news the following week. So this was in the news because the Labour Party were busy having meetings about they were going to check out anybody who didn't call people by the right pronouns. So that was going on at the time, and there was a lot of dispute about the Gender Recognition Act. Was it going to be expanded, made more like liberal? And so this cartoon was about that. It was about the danger of men who are going to use getting this certificate to invade women's spaces. It's pretty tame when you look at it now compared to what we know has actually happened 2 years.
Can you spend a minute just describing this cartoon, because this will go on platforms that's just audio?
Okay, well, it just shows a cartoon crocodile slithering into a little pool where there's 3 newts in the pool with their little heads poking out. And this was actually to represent a women's only swimming space, by the way, women's only swimming session. But that was my idea behind it. So there's 3 little newts, and one of them is saying, you can't come in here, this is our safe space. And the crocodile is sort of drooling at the mouth, and he's saying, oh, don't worry your pretty little heads, I'm transitioning into a newt. So pretty harmless stuff. I mean, it's, you know, and the reason I've said to other people that I think there was such a reaction against it is because it's like a kid's cartoon. Right, it's colourful. It's like the sort of thing you'll see on the telly, little kids' cartoons. You know, I think that's what it was that upset people the most.
I don't think that's the reason that upset them the most.
You don't? Okay.
I think the reason what upset them the most is you was on the left. You was on the far left. And how are we going to protect these vulnerable groups and our ideology. It's hard enough fighting against the right for this, but when we've got internal people fighting against us, we need to go after them even harder.
And yet, as you can see, Nick, the cartoon is about women's safety and not about attacking any group at all. It's about
Absolutely not.
women's safety and the danger to women's safety that this because obviously the Morning Star was writing about what was going on. It was writing about the proposed changes to GRA. This wasn't in a vacuum. So they actually published the cartoon. This is what happened. They published the cartoon on the weekend edition. When the editor came back to work on the Monday, basically the SHIT hit the fan, at the Morning Star. And he's told me privately, I can talk about it now, it's 2 years later. He had to threaten to resign. Half his staff were threatening to resign. The paper was under threat of being closed down. They were really over a barrel over it, Nick, and I don't blame them to this day what they had to do. But I was very upset because I had no personal contact. You just dropped like a hot brick and there's nothing.
Yeah. And I think a bit like me, obviously you did that cartoon as professional. You was not trying to be provocative, as in more than you would normally do as a political cartoonist. You weren't having a go at anybody because you never did that before. And I think just like me, you was the wrong person at the wrong place at the wrong time. I criticised Black Lives Matter. What I said 2 years ago, you could say now nobody would blink because it's turned out to be true. What you drew 2.5 years ago, anyone could draw now. Nobody would blink because it's all turned out to be true. We were just slightly ahead of the curve. And when you put your head above the parapet by mistake, you get it shot off. I mean, you got our heads shot off by mistake.
I think what surprised me the most about it was that the Morning Star was so out there. They were so out there in their field. They hadn't blinked an eye at some of my other cartoons, which were really outrageous. They were so outrageous I couldn't possibly send them to you and put them up on the screen for a family audience, I mean, I had, I'll just describe one to you, which was an anti-EU cartoon, which showed, which conflated the EU with knife gangs in London. It actually showed a couple of guys on the back of a scooter with knives who had just beaten up this guy lying on the ground with a Union Jack shirt on, and they had EU on the side of their scooter, and the two guys with knives and masks, and they were saying, well, here's the deal: we carry on beating you up, and you give us loads more money, right? So the Morning Star happy to print that sort of thing, which would be very offensive to some people. Not least the families of people who are victims of knife crime in London.
No, absolutely, but it's not offensive. It's not offensive to the far left.
No, but do you understand what I mean? They hadn't blinked an eye at some of my previous cartoons. I had the royal family as a load of parasites hanging off an enormous fat bottom, pink bottom, this sort of thing. It just went on and on. And so, to my mind, the cartoon of the crocodile going into the pool was quite mild compared to some of my other cartoons that I'd done for them, so I was very, very surprised.
Yeah, and it's just like I said, you were slightly ahead of the curve, and because of that, you got punished just like me.
You and me don't need to go into all the details of what's going on. People can find it on numerous feminist and pro-women websites about men in women's prisons and what's going on in Scotland and everything. So you and me don't need to go into that. But as you say, events have proved that cartoon was prophetic, really.
Absolutely. And let's say it turned out that me and you were wrong, which was always a possibility. That's still not a problem, because you don't know you're wrong until you share your ideas and other people correct you. So having this new societal trait we have now, which is not only do I not agree with you, but you're not allowed to share your ideas. That's a dangerous place to be. And I'd rather someone prove I was wrong so I can learn and I can move on.
Well, let's look at it this way, Nick. You and me, we could say we were born to be in this time because we are part of the movement to preserve, to protect free speech. So in many ways, what's happened to us, it was painful at the time. It affected our family life. It affected a lot of things, but it affected our income, everything, livelihood, everything. But we were in that position for a purpose, both of us.
I agree. I wouldn't change anything that I did. I wouldn't change any of it. I would still have wrote that article. I still would have sent it out, knowing what I know now, because my life has changed, but I think it's changed for the better. And I believe I've always tried to improve society with the charity I set up, the work I've done on the streets, and this is just a new part of it. We can't have a society where some people are not allowed to talk and share their opinions. That's not a healthy society.
And the funny thing is that we're both in a position in a way that we've been very involved in community work in the past and left-wing things, you know, but none of that mattered to the people who just wanted to cancel us, you know. None of that mattered.
Yeah, one of the best insults I ever got was from a lady on Twitter when I was going through all this. She said, Nick, I'll take on board all your charity work, the amazing work you've done over decades, all the awards you've won, saving young people, getting involved in crime, getting homeless people off the streets, stopping girls being raped by gangs. I'll take all that on board. That just means you're compassionate. So really, you're just a compassionate Nazi. And that was the best insult I ever got. Compassionate Nazi.
Right, okay. But another thing I think we probably both share is that since this happened to us, we found out who our real friends are. And we've probably got a much expanded network of people who we never even knew existed. Certainly in my case, I was pitched headfirst into the women's movement, fighting for women's free speech. I'm a member of Kelly J. Keene's organisation, Standing for Women. I go to Reformers Tree. I've spoken at her events, and when we speak at her events, we can be faced by a real rabid mob of people, which you can't even imagine until you're in the middle of it, with the police trying to hold them back, you know. And so I've spoken. I go to Reformers Tree in Hyde Park every month, and quite often speak there. And what we're trying to do is build up, you know, she calls it taking back the public square one corner at a time, because so many of us have been banned off the public square in social media. So her attitude back in 2019 was, we need to go into the public square again. And so that's what her events are all about. It's about going and speaking in public. And I've done that. I've met friends all over the world, you know, especially in America, where they're struggling with their free speech big time, you know, and that it's opened my eyes and it's opened my mind to what goes on in other countries. I have to say I was probably quite insular. Even working for the Morning Star, I was quite insular because I was just in this bubble of left-wing politics. You know, I didn't really, people have said to me, oh, do you think you're a bit naive with the cartoon? Well, not really. I didn't even think of it as controversial. To me, it was just a news story that had cropped up that week, and I was doing a cartoon about that news story.
Yeah, I didn't think my article was controversial. I wrote about what Black Lives Matter had put on their own website, and then the second half of the article, I mean, that wasn't a huge article. It was only 700 words. The second half was really about, in my experience, what we need to do to improve Black lives in the UK. And I talked about getting more fathers in the home, reducing knife crime. And my article wasn't controversial. I wasn't having a go at anyone. It wasn't controversial.
No, it's remarkable, isn't it? God. And the other good thing is that new platforms have come into being where we can now speak more freely. I mean, I'm on Getter, which is an alternative to Twitter, and I'm massively enjoying it on there. It's great fun. I'm on there for the cartoons and the politics and the banter, and it's not a right-wing platform. There's masses of left-wing people on there as well. But what I love about it is that you can reach out to people. In America, they call this across the aisle. So you can reach out to work with people of different politics, different religion, but you have a common cause. And the main common cause, especially in the women's movement now, is child protection, child safeguarding. And we find that we have common cause with people who we would consider on the far right, you know, especially in America, you know, very highly religious people. We might not agree with a word they say about everything else, but we have common cause with them, protecting women and children, protecting the human family, which is seriously under attack from transhumanism. I'm an anti-transhumanist. That's where I'm planting my flag, and that's it, you know.
So I've read one or two things about you, and I was quite upset when I read an article you wrote about your childhood. For someone who's spent 20 years working with children, I've seen many dysfunctional families. I've seen many parents who never should be allowed to have children, shouldn't be allowed to have a dog, could have treated their kids that badly. I'm not saying that's in your case, but you had a very challenging childhood, and part of that was you confused about. It seemed as if you were confused at parts about your own gender. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Could you talk about that for a few minutes?
Well, that's right, and I have written about it. It is out there. I'll mention one website which it's on, which is Peak Trans website. You can read my story on there, and I have talked about it on other podcasts. So it's not a secret. Both my parents are dead, so I'm free to talk about them. And yeah, I have said in the past, I think my own gender dysphoria was a product of PTSD following an abusive and a very unhappy childhood. So when I was young, I was running away from home, spending as little time at school as possible, skiving from school. I wouldn't go as far as to say falling in with the wrong crowd because I was too young, but I would just skive off school and go off into the countryside and hardly do anything. It's a miracle how I got past my O-levels at all. Dropped out of school at 16, didn't have higher education. So yeah, and that was all a product of this dysphoria, which a lot of people calling gender dysphoria, but a lot of people are just calling body dysmorphia or dysphoria. Because you could also include all the girls who think they're anorexic, and other things like autism. People who do not feel comfortable as they're growing up in their own body, don't feel that they belong here in the world. They feel completely isolated.
How did you feel? How did all this present itself to you?
I grew up believing that I was a boy, right up until puberty, because my father brought me up as if I was a boy. So he brought myself and my brother up in the same way. He took us to barber shop to get short back and sides together. He took us to football together. In fact, he took me a lot more than he took my brother because he thought my brother was a sissy, right? So I was much more treated as the boy than my brother was in many ways. And I had all boys' toys. I had Action Man. Space. I was massively interested in space and yeah, boys' things completely. Boys' comics. I honestly believed, before puberty came along, I honestly believed that when I was 18, I would grow a beard, be 6 foot tall and join the army. I honestly believed that. Right? I really believed that. That was my picture of what my world was going to be like. I didn't see the reality of my life where I was actually a disabled child who would never be capable of doing anything like that, So you could say that I was deliberately blotting out the reality of what my life was really like, yeah?
Could you say that part of that, because your childhood was so unhappy, that you were trying to do anything you could do to make your father happy?
Yeah, even though I would have always said I hated my father and I was frightened of him. But yes, at the back of your mind, you're trying to make your parents love you, aren't you? Regardless of how you feel about them, And puberty comes along and it's like being hit over the head with a brick. You suddenly realize that you've been living this fantasy up until that point, especially as I lived in a family where I was told nothing about puberty. So some families are a lot closer. My family was not a close family. I was unlucky that way, I didn't get any preparation for what life was going to be like or anything.
It's strange when you're a child, when you see how other families interact and how they live as a family. I came from a very loving family. The first thing I do when I walk into my mum's house now is hug her and kiss her. And that's always been the case.
There was none of that at all in my family, nothing like that at all.
Well, I had a girlfriend many years ago in my early 20s, and she had a child. And I was surprised that she never ever hugged and kissed him. She fed him and cleaned him, and he was, he wasn't abused, but there was never any physical contact or love or hugs or kisses, and it used to blow my mind.
You've probably heard of children being disassociated, not just from their own body, but from their family, from everything around them. And I was like that because I would go to friends' houses that were just what you've described, where they were all happy and loving and all laughing together, and the parents playing with the children. And I felt like an alien from another planet, Nick. I honestly felt like an alien from another planet. I used to think all the people walking around me were just androids, not real people. Yeah. And you could say that comes from watching Doctor Who and so on, but I honestly felt that disassociated. And one of the stories I've told is that when I was walking home from the bus from school, where I used to walk home down the country lanes to where we lived, I always felt that when I turned around the corner, my house wasn't going to be there, that it would just be fields, there would be no houses. And that was a very, very strong image that was in my mind. And that was because I just didn't feel that I really was part of it all, you know? And I think...
And wasn't happy there. So
I think
why would you want your home to be there when that home has there's no happiness in there whatsoever?
And I have to be honest with you, Nick, I've almost never dared to go back in 60 years. And I did go back there when I was having a country walk, and I thought, I'm going to walk past my old house. And even today, it would give me the shivers. And we're talking about 50 years later. Do you understand what I mean? So it just gave me the shivers, as if it was walking past a haunted house, you know? So
it represents nothing but unhappiness to you.
So I consider it all as a product of PTSD, and I don't care what other people call it or where they think it originates, but that's where I think it originated with me.
Yeah. Well, that's another good segue. So my final question is, as someone who, as you know, you've got unique life experience here in some of this, why do you think we've got an explosion in trans, an explosion in young girls thinking they're boys and wanting to have into operations? Why do we think we've got an explosion of men, usually middle-aged, who want to put on lipstick and a short skirt and say, call me Dorothy? Why is all this? 10 years ago, no one had heard of any of this. This was so under the carpet, but now it's in our face all the time. Major businesses are buying into it. Why do you think this happens? And is there a reason behind it?
People are writing reams and reams of stuff about it. You've got three separate issues there. You've got the massive amount of young girls being sucked into this. You've got the older men who are, it's part of their midlife crisis, if you like. Here's my method of abandoning my family, right? And we all know that that's part of it. You know, leaving their wives, they're called trans widows, leaving their wives, wrecking their children's lives. So that's another group. And then you've also, what was the third thing you said was about?
Corporations are buying into it.
Yeah, why has it exploded in society? Why is it so? A lot of people think the reason our politicians just laid down and died for this so quickly was blackmail. Especially in a small country like Britain, where everybody knows one another. The elite class all went to the same schools, all went to the same parties, all knew one another growing up. There's an awful lot of blackmail going on. Oh, if you don't do this, we'll tell what happened at your school when you did that, right? There's an awful lot of blackmail going on. Absolutely positive about that. It would destroy people's careers if they knew one of their skeletons in the cupboard, right? So there's a lot of that going on as to why it's took over society so quickly, so easily. But the two separate issues of the young people and the older men, they're two very, very separate things, because the older men we used to just call transvestites. Back in the day, you know, we all saw on television, you know, Les Dawson and all them. We just thought that was all hilarious. Nobody thought that was abusive to women. We all thought going to the panto and seeing pantomime dames, it was just a laugh. And
but I think the difference is it was never sexual. Les Dawson and the other person over the washing line talking about gossip in the street. It was, there were different levels to that comedy, but it was never sexual. They weren't talking about their vaginas or getting their nipples pierced.
And they weren't trying to force other people to pretend that they were women.
No, exactly.
Everybody knew that it was showbiz, that it was performance.
And that was part of the joke.
Yeah, my absolute favourite was Stanley Baxter, who used to do the Queen, and Shirley Bassey, and he was like 6 foot tall Scotsman, and he couldn't disguise that he was a man at all. He was hilariously funny. So yeah, we all grew up with that, and then but there were a few transvestite men, and they were accepted as being this very, very small, tiny group of men who possibly needed help, you know, and that's why you had an organisation like the Beaumont Trust, I think it's called, who were for them. But the modern thing where all these children are being sucked into it is a completely new aspect of it. And that is because to try and pretend that this has always been here, you have to suck more and more children into it. And you have to find more and more old people, because if you can find some older people, you say, oh, look, they must have been like it all their lives. You see what I mean? So you're able to project it back into the past and say, oh, it's always been here. It hasn't always been here at all, you know. And yet I'm talking about like that, and yet I've already said I was like this as a child. And I was in psychiatric hospital by the age of 16. Clearly because I was so mixed up, and that's where I was sent straight from school one day.
Now, would it be fair to say that if you were 16 years old with your life now and it was today, there's a very good chance you would be on hormones and you would be having operations?
The other thing is, Nick, that nobody ever, I was in psychiatric hospital for 6 months, not a single psychiatrist ever sat down and said, well, what's behind all this? So I was unable at that young age to say, I've got an abusive father, this is happening at home. I was unable to say that because nobody asked me the question. So I just went on, no education, became an alcoholic adult, fell into things like domestic violence, victim of domestic violence, just fell in with all the wrong crowds as a young adult. And my whole life in my 20s wasn't particularly nice at all, you know. So it's all a product of having an unhappy childhood, an abusive childhood. And this is like a disclaimer. You constantly have to say, oh, this is only my experience. But I do believe that what happened to me is similar to a lot of other girls. And they might have gone down the route of cutting themselves, or anorexia, and other kinds of self-harm like that.
The more I work with children, I say it's 2 decades now, the more every year I realize that parents are the causes of so much pain in their children's lives. You know, you can have, you know, very rich middle class parents and you think their life's wonderful. They go to Caribbean twice a year, take their kids. That must be a wonderful lifestyle. But you don't know what goes on behind closed doors. You don't, there might not be any physical violence, but you don't understand that mum and dad are screaming at those kids 24/7. Why haven't you got 5 A's? Well, I'm not academically gifted. That's not good enough. You're letting the family down, you know, and that destroys kids. Kids need a loving, nurturing environment. It's not about money. It's not about what holidays you can give your children. It's about that hug on your parents' knee and that kiss and telling you that I love you and I'm here for you and I'll always protect you and I want the best for you. That's how you give kids the best start in life, not by bullying them, not by physical punishment. It's about making them believe they're safe, because once a child knows they're safe, they're more likely then to experiment, to push the boundaries, to want to achieve, because they know they're safe. It's hard to want to do better for your life when you think I'm in danger all the time. That's not the right mindset.
I mean, my gender dysphoria carried on into my as an adult. So I hope your audience won't mind me mentioning something very personal. But as a young woman, or young girl, you do things to prevent yourself having periods. So you can take the contraceptive pill continuously, stops you having periods, right? You can do that. I did that. In fact, I talked my mother into letting the doctor do me that from the age of 15. So that's how you do it. You suppress your femininity. You dress like a boy. I had a psychiatrist ask me in my 40s, why are you a 40-something woman dressing like a teenage boy? And I said, because it's a way of hiding. And that is exactly right. It is. It's a way of escaping reality. You know, if you look like you're a right weirdo, nobody's going to come and sit next to you on the bus, right? It's a way of protecting yourself, right? So yeah, and I'm convinced that that's why a lot of young girls are sucked into this. It's their way of escaping all the stresses, all the horrible future they see for themselves as a teenage girl. This is their way of escaping from it.
What's a solution?
Oh, we need to revert back to harmless ways of rebellion. I mean, the other day in Bristol, I was out shopping and it was a lovely sunny day, and I saw a group of goths walking down the road. They were only 17 or 18, boys and girls together, dressed as goths, obviously going to a party. And I thought, oh my God, it's like turning back in time to the 70s. How wonderful when they had crazes, they could dress up, and it was harmless, Nick. And nobody pretended that you were some other kind of species or human being and have to cut bits off yourself in order to become part of that group. The worst they would have is a nose ring. Do you understand what I mean? And that's what we have to get back to. And that is, unfortunately, that is why the trans cult is going after the very young children now, the primary school children, because the teenagers are already growing out of it, Nick. They can already see it for the madness it is. So they're losing that age group, and that's why they're going after the parents and trying to blackmail them and saying, oh, if you don't do this, your child will kill themselves. Dreadful, dreadful the way they do it. You know, it's a cult, Nick. It is a cult.
It is a cult. It's an ideology. It's a cult. And the reason why they're going after children is because they're easier to convince. And once you convince a child, the odds are that child will always believe that. That's why most people don't change religions. You're given a religion at birth by your parents, and 99.9% of people never change, because once you indoctrinate a child, it gets hardwired into them, hence why they're going after them.
Obviously getting a bit dark, but you and me, the same age group, we can remember PIE, we can remember the paedophile information exchange and how involved they were with the left in this country, how they were protected by the hierarchy of the Labour Party. We can remember those days, and nothing has changed. These groups didn't disappear. They went underground. Now they've reappeared in a different format. And child protection is the #1 issue that this country has always been very bad at. You know, we pay a lot of lip service to it, but we're very bad at it.
Yeah, all you got to do is look at the grooming gang scandal.
Look at the way it's come out.
Tens of thousands of girls raped across the country, and no one said anything because they were scared of the left.
They were scared of the left. They were scared of being called racist. But what I have often said to people who I discuss this with, what people are forgetting, it wasn't just Pakistani background. In Bristol, we have Somalian grooming gangs. It's not the demographic, it's the religion. Okay, so it's not the demographic, it's the religion that gives them the excuse to do it. Okay. So, and also what people don't realize, it's not just white girls that were targeted, Sikh girls in the Sikh community. They were trying to expose this for years and years and years. Nobody was listening to them either. So it was basically just young working class girls that they thought would not complain, nobody would listen to them.
And that no one cared about.
No one cared, nobody would listen. Their parents were maybe working 3 jobs to try and make ends meet. Or they didn't have one parent at home or something. It was just it was dysfunctional. And
I think part of that problem was single parent households. If you mess with a teenage girl who's got a father at home, there's a chance you will incur violence by that father. So if you target girls with no male protectors at home, it's easy street. No one's protecting them.
Predators know where to look for a victim, Nick.
Exactly. Just like that. This ends well now. Just like that crocodile you drew, looking at those 3 newts going, I'm just like you, knowing he wants to eat him, because those newts had no protectors whatsoever.
Well, yeah, and that's happened in real life. We've had women's movement, little protests at the women's ponds on Hampstead Heath and things like that, which are open to men. Craziness. It was invented by like the Edwardians to give women somewhere safe to swim.
Yeah, it's a crazy world, but people like you, people like me, people like Posey Parker, and there's people out there speaking about this in many countries now. I do think the tide's turned. A couple of years ago, all this was forbidden to speak about, hence why you got cancelled. but it's in the public domain now. People are sick of it. People are not having it. People, the more they understand it and see it, the more they go, no, this is lunacy. We're not having this. And charities like Mermaids are done. They don't know they're done, but they're done now. Stonewall won't be around in a couple of years. I can't see them being around.
Especially in America, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. There's going to be a lot of people, they're going, the victims are going to come after the people who did this to them, and can't wait to see it personally.
Have you heard that almost 1,000 parents now are lining up to sue the Tavistock Centre, the NHS Tavistock Centre, because of what they did to their children and didn't give them the full information and just rushed them into changes? So you're right, lawsuits will be coming now, and that's going to stop a lot of this.
And in your case, the issue that got you cancelled, look what we've seen with BLM.
Crooks, frauds, fraudsters.
Yeah, the criminality is unbelievable. In my own city of Bristol, where they pulled the Edward Colston statue down in the middle of a Black Lives Matter protest, four white kids were accused of doing it. It's now come out that one of the black activists in BLM in Bristol is now accused of fraud.
Yep, she was in court a couple of weeks ago.
Thousands of pounds disappear, it's happening all over the place.
Exactly. So it makes me smile that people like me and you end up get proven right in the long term, which is always good because we weren't wrong. But society is the way society is, and we just need to keep fighting. Before we go, where can people find you? Anything you want to promote?
Yeah, well, this is my book, Nick, and if I can hold it up to the camera, can you see that?
Yep, I can see that calendar.
So that's
cancelled.
That's my book, 2020, the year we were all cancelled, it's called. Although it's about 2020, it covers things like COVID restrictions, the way, we were all kept, but a lot of it is about women's activism. That's on Amazon, so anybody can get that for Christmas.
I'll put the link for that in the description.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I'm on Getter just as @Radical Cartoons. Where else can people find me? Getter's the only social media I'm really on. My website is just called radicalcartoons.com, and people can approach me for commissions if they like. I'm a book illustrator as well as a cartoonist. And I must admit, Nick, early retirement, I was forced into it, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm able to practice as an artist in a way that I couldn't before. So, and I have friends that I never knew I had all over the world. And I think that's the great thing that's come out of it, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think the best way people to support you would be buy your book, or if you need an illustrator for anything whatsoever, we need to support people like you by making sure we offer you work when the work needs to be done.
I've got a small YouTube channel which is just called Radical Cartoons, which I do little chats about cancel culture, and I've got cartoon workshops where showing myself producing some artwork, so people might find that interesting.
Yeah, well, people should check all that out. Thank you, Stella, for coming on. It's been a great chat. I'm sorry I missed your story when it happened, but like I said, I was in my own bubble. I didn't think things like this happened until it happened to me. But I'm glad we've had this conversation. I'm glad it's worked out for you. I'm glad you've been proven to be right.
Well, I echo what you said about the Free Speech Union. Join it even if you don't need it right away, because your membership fee helps all these other people who are being cancelled and help them as well.
Hear, hear. I always plug the Free Speech Union. Fantastic. That's great. I'm sure we'll chat again sometime. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Stella. Bye-bye.